Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm here with James Valliant. James, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, it's always great to be here with you, Tim.
Thank you so much.
Great interview.
It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been too long.
Our notes. We haven't spoken in quite a while. I think our first interview was back in September of 2020, but the last one was December 2021. So we haven't spoken in almost 3 years. I got my dates right.
Right. It does not seem that long.
It does. We've spoken a lot, privately as well since then. But I do want to ask for anyone that's watching, if you could comment, if you can hear us okay. And also, I'm hearing this from my side, but it could just be me. So I'd love to hear if anyone could give us some feedback on if the sound sounds okay. And in terms of getting started, I just want to give a quick bio to James. This is a big one. You've done a lot. You've been a busy man. Okay, I'm seeing it is reverb and echoes. Okay, we do have that problem. James, do you mind just checking if anything else you can do? We're getting an echo from me. If we can. But as we move forward here, that's fine. I do have echo cancellation on, so it should.
Say something again.
Something again.
That's a good one. Is it still there?
I think it's still there. But I think it might be a little bit better.
Given the state of you say I've done a lot of things. One thing I have not done is become a master of the computer, and so given my technical limitations, I'm afraid that's the best I can do.
Sounds good. We'll go with it, and I'll try to back up a little bit from my microphone. But you're going to be doing most of the talking anyway. So for anyone that's sort of turned off by the echoing, I'm sorry. But you'll be hearing most of James today. Yeah, I still hear it. It's really interesting. Of getting started with the bio. James is a native of Los Angeles. He obtained a degree in philosophy from New York University and a Juris Doctorate from the University of San Diego. And for over 17 years, he was the deputy assistant attorney for the county of San Diego. Yeah, I really hear that. Give me 1 second here. I almost hear myself more than I can hear myself live. Like I'm hearing the feedback. James, do you mind for a second just putting your microphone on mute? That might be a good way to start. Okay, can everyone still hear me okay? Hopefully that's the case. So if you can hear me, let me know, and we might have to play that mute game a little bit, but we'll see here. Bonnie says okay. Can everyone still hear me? Can I have a thumbs up if you can hear me from somebody? James, can you hear me? Okay, cool. So yeah, we'll play the mute game. I'll have you mute yourself here or there, and we'll go back and forth if we have to. But anyway, going back again, James Valliant, a native of Los Angeles, he obtained a degree in philosophy from New York University and a Juris Doctorate from the University of San Diego. For over 17 years, he was a deputy assistant attorney for the county of San Diego. For many years, he was an expert commentator on religious, legal, and political topics for many shows in the San Diego area. He was the host and co-creator of the award-winning TV interview program called Ideas in Action. And he's the author of The Passion of Ayn Rand's Critics. And tell me in a second if I mispronounce that name. I always get it wrong. The Passion of Ayn Rand's Critics. And he's the co-author of the book Creating Christ, which provides a background for the idea of Roman provenance, which refers to how Christianity may have been created. To read more about Creating Christ, please visit his website, creatingchrist.com. And I'll have a link. I've got the link beneath this video for if you want to also go check out his book on Amazon. And the co-author, Warren Fahey, his website's there as well. And in terms of, before we get started, I asked James permission to, even though he's the one we're interviewing today, if I could just say a few quick words just to kick us off. So James, I appreciate your willingness to let me take the stage here, sort of in the larger sense for the first 3 or 4 minutes, and then we're going to hear from you more for almost all the interview. But basically, a couple quick things. When James and I first met back in September of 2020, we were talking, I think, mostly about Roman provenance. But in December of 2021, we did a cool interview, which I do recommend people listen to, where I just kind of said, I don't want to talk about the origins of Christianity today. I just want to pick your brain. And we went into topics such as the idea of confirmation bias in Christians, childhood indoctrination, things like that. Fun, interesting topics. We're going to do something very similar today, where we're going to dive into some of these topics. But before we do, I just want to mention one thing. I want to say a word of appreciation for James. Number one, I've appreciated your friendship over the years. You've been awesome to just get to know. The pleasure has been all mine. And in terms of just what you do with with Roman Provenance, I know you're chomping at the bit to jump in here. I appreciate you staying on mute for another second. But your work has been helpful to a lot of people to talk about where Christianity may have come from. But one of the things I do appreciate too is that you've, in the discussions I've been in with you and seen you do, you come at it from a perspective of saying there's some information that you've uncovered and you've talked with other people about, and you just want to bring it to the forefront and say, let's dialogue about these topics. We don't know for sure if that's all there is to it. And of course, we're all kind of chomping at the bit to say, when's the next Dead Sea Scrolls going to be discovered? Or who knows, maybe before the Library of Alexandria got burned down, somebody was smart enough to go bury 300 scrolls, and we'll find them someday. And things will change as we uncover things with archaeology. But just saying we don't know everything, and we have the humility to admit that, but knowing what we know now, there are some different possibilities for how the things that we see in history played out. And people are going to come at that from different angles. And I know you and I would disagree. We've talked about it. We do disagree on some things. I give mythicism, for example, a little bit more credence than I think you would. But we can agree to disagree on some different topics. And at the end of the day, the cool thing is we can have a friendship and say, and I regret that we're on different coasts. I'm on the East Coast, he's on the West Coast. But at the end of the day, if we were in the same place, we wouldn't end up fist fighting saying, you know, you're a jerk because you don't see this dead guy from 2,000 years ago the same way I do. We can say, you know what, we disagree. In some ways we disagree even strongly, but let's go have a pizza and a beer and let's be friends. And I do want to encourage the community to pursue that kind of mindset. I think, you know, we have seen time and time again in the deconverting community that we can be arguably more gracious and loving than the Christians, or as ourselves when we were Christians. We can be more loving, we can be more gracious. And on that note, one of the topics that we're going to talk about here in a minute, I'm going to pass the ball to you, James, to respond to what I just said. But after that, we're going to get into some topics that relate specifically to not Roman provenance and to everything I just said, but just the idea of this black and white thinking that we get into where we say it's my way or the highway, you agree with me, or we're enemies. And that thinking, I think, needs to end. And I think we're better people for it. We really are better people than that. And just to say, you know, especially in this life, you never know what's going to come back to bite you. The person that you write off might be the one person that could help you fix your flat tire in the rain. You know, you don't want to burn all your bridges if you don't have to. So I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate that you and I can and have disagreed on stuff, and we can walk away smiling and shaking hands and saying it's just great to chat. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask some questions here in a second, but I'm going to pass the ball to you to answer any or say anything you want to about the bio. If I got anything wrong on the bio, anything at all about what I just said, and we'll get into the questions.
Well, in ancient history in particular, my God, what we're looking at is very fragmentary evidence, aren't we? I mean, we're groping around in a very dark room, trying to figure out as best as we can based on some very limited and sometimes questionable evidence. And so any piece of that evidence from 2,000 years ago, if we're talking about the history of Christianity, look, when it comes to complex matters in our own time, surely the discussion is more important than the emotional effusions and the moral evaluations, and the science sets aside ideally, now I know it's difficult to do, but ideally we set aside personal bias so that we can have an intelligent conversation based on the facts and logic, and hopefully move the ball at least slightly forward in human knowledge. But human knowledge is inherently limited. There is no human that is omniscient. There is no human who is infallible. And when it comes to I know I'm giggling here, but when it comes to the question of ancient history, surely reasonable minds can differ. And we have to bear in mind that on these technical questions, you brought up mythicism, for example, it's a subject we just avoid in the book altogether. It's a relevant topic. It's important for some people, I suppose, but if it wasn't directly relevant to what we were discussing, we left that very emotional and heated question aside. But questions like that are difficult, There are intelligent people of good faith on both sides, and I just forever do not understand why they personalize it, why they make it so emotional. I know we get committed to our truth, to our theory, and there's nothing wrong with that. Being passionate about the truth is a wonderful thing, but we should never let that passion to acquire the truth get in the way such that we ignore other people's contexts. People are coming at it with their own perspective from their own personal context, and that has to be understood anytime we engage one-on-one with someone. And look, if I'm dead wrong, please, I will every single person who can refute my position, I will thank immensely. When I'm corrected, and this is an attitude maybe we should all habituate in ourselves, when corrected, we should be appreciative. We should, in the first instance, be aware that this challenges our premise. Be fair about that. Don't take it personally. And if it turns out that the other guy might be right, or at least the other guy might make a point that we need to take into account that we had failed to. The first step is to see from their perspective why they came to that perspective, and to give it a fair shot, and to try and understand as best as we can from their perspective why they came from it. Unless we do that, we're not even qualified to take issue. And even if we do take issue, we really have to be able to say, look, reasonable minds can differ. I'm not going to take this personally. I just find that insane, frankly.
Yeah. And if you don't mind, I'm going to mute for one more second. And for anyone that's just joining us, I apologize. We're having some audio issues here. So you're going to mute yourself real quick, James? Okay, thank you so much. And I apologize for that. We're going to have a tougher time on this interview, going back and forth as smoothly, but we'll have that fixed for the next one. We will be doing this again a little sooner. Yeah, there's such an immense need for that perspective, and it leads right into my first question. So I'll jump right in here, and then you can pick us back up. One of the things we talk a lot on my channel about is fundamentalism, and I do have a few people that I've interviewed here or there that are from a more liberal background, where it's Unitarian Universalist or High Episcopalian or something, where they're not going to preach hellfire and brimstone that much. They're not going to probably preach original sin, at least not to the same extent. And anyone that goes to that church has a pretty good chance of escaping with a lot less religious trauma than someone that grew up in a group like I did. And others are even more intense. But within that word fundamentalism, we often attach it to the idea of Christian fundamentalism. And so we're saying it's my way or the highway about my interpretation of the Bible and of theology, and even of secondary things like eschatology. How's it all going to end? And how do we interpret the atonement this way? And how do we explain the Trinity? All these different topics, and so many people are willing to separate over them. And I remember I went to Bob Jones University for a year, and one of the things they talked about there was secondary separation, where you not only say, I have an opinion and you have a differing opinion, so we're now enemies, but also you and I, if you and I agree on something, but you're friends with someone who I disagree with, because you're friends with my enemy, essentially, you become my enemy. And so fundamentalism is this idea of we need to separate because we're not on the same page. And when we escape Christianity, I think there's this assumption that we have that says, finally, I've escaped the black and white thinking. I'm no longer in this dualism of my way or the highway. I'm open to thinking about maybe the Buddhists have something good to say. Maybe these other religions have something important to say. And if I was a Protestant, maybe the Catholics had something good to say. And I'm okay with that. But when you really get into the nitty-gritty of daily life, not necessarily religious topics, but just daily life, you end up finding out that for many of us, we haven't actually escaped fundamentalism. We've escaped fundamentalist Christianity, perhaps, but we have not escaped fundamentalism. This black and white thinking, no gray area, no nuance, and no grace. You must be thinking like me, or we are enemies. And I've even heard people say things like, if you think that way, we are no longer friends. You're no longer a friend of this channel, or you're no longer a friend of me. And it breaks my heart, because I'm realizing fundamentalism is part of it's not just a religious journey, it's a human journey. It's a tribalism. We want to people to be just like us, or else we're enemies. And obviously that has endless ramifications in the culture in terms of, sexuality and gender, all kinds of different flavors of that fundamentalism. But I wanted to ask if you could talk to that topic. How do we get past fundamentalism, not just from the purely religious standpoint, but just in general, where we can agree to disagree and still be friends?
Well, dualism here, used in the sense that you mean, is, I think, I don't want to quote philosophers and get all academic on us here, but in the post-Hegelian world, the dualism of true or false has been assaulted by philosophers. If you mean that there isn't a truth, if you mean that all views are equally valid, then of course I'm a black and white dualist. That is to say, I believe that things are what they are, and that it's up to our mind to figure out what they are, and that our mind can figure out truth and can figure out falsehood. If we were to ignore, say, the mathematics and engineering required to build a bridge, that bridge is going to collapse. There is an absolute truth and an absolute falsehood for us to discover. So if when we assault fundamentalism, we're assaulting the idea that truth can be discovered, or that if we're trying to reject the true-false dualism, if you will, then what we're doing is we're saying that all ideas are equally valid. There's no way to acquire the truth. There is no difference. There is no truth. There is no right or wrong. I disagree with all of that. 1 + 1 = 2. And I could, with a much more sophisticated argument, tell you that murder is wrong. Human beings ought not to intentionally kill one another. Things of that sort. I think even moral truths are available, not just scientific truths. And I know that flies in the face of a lot of academic thinking about morality, since the philosopher David Hume said we could not derive an ought from an is factually. I disagree with that. Now, having said that there is a difference between true beliefs and false beliefs, because that's really the premise of any discussion or argument. I mean, you eliminate the quest for truth if you say that there is no difference between true and false. It really doesn't matter. I may as well, use a Ouija board or throw darts. That kind of skepticism and subjectivism necessitates dogmatism, because we do need to act, and we act on our knowledge or our best belief of reality, and that need to act in the face of unknowns is still there. So if I reject rational truth, I reject truth as such as a goal, then, of course, I'm just a subjectivist, and any fundamentalist's view is just as valid as any atheist's view, or anything in between. No, there is a difference between true and false. Now, fundamentalism is not simply a belief that there is a difference between true and false, that kind of black and white dualism. It says that since reason cannot get us to the truth, we must accept truths on some other basis. Of course, it always comes down to emotions, not a rational argument. And so it must be. If your belief is formed in a non-rational way, then of course you are going to be dogmatic in its application. You're not going to question it. Hey, is this religious dictum about homosexuality right or wrong? Because I think there's a definite answer there. Now, we don't question it because it came from this authority. So it's not this, the problem with fundamentalism is not that they believe that there's a truth and that some ideas are false. No, the problem is how they get to that truth, and how they get to that truth by means of faith or mysticism, a non-rational means. It doesn't matter whether it's a horoscope, a Ouija board, abracadabra, whatever the pseudo cause that because there is no such thing as causeless magical knowledge, although they reduce it to magical knowledge. I had this, like St. Paul, I had this revelation that lifted me up into the levels of heaven or something. If it's mystical revelation, then of course it's an unquestioned truth. It's a truth that can never be tested by reason. Can never be. See, science is forever a self-adjusting, self-correcting, if necessary, process. If your belief is irrational or irrational, then you're not subjecting your belief to that process, that continuous acid test of checking it against reality. And knowing that we are, as I started out saying, not omniscient and not infallible, means that we have to be careful about how we come to believe the things that we do. because truth is so important, because falsehood and error are possible, that is why we have to be methodologically clear about how we get there. But if the how you get there doesn't take into account the facts, the limitations of human knowledge, the need to deploy a specific method, only verifiable observations, reason is a very demanding thing as opposed to faith. You see, faith says turn your head over to some authority, whether it's the authority of your preacher, a Bible, or your own emotions. And that's really what it always comes down to, your emotions. Well, then it's off limits from the acid test of reason. If, on the other hand, you recognize, no, I need to engage in a specific method, and and maybe I will expand a little bit my knowledge if I deploy that method correctly. Verified observation, logical analysis. But then if you commit yourself to that context, you're already aware, well, I can't treat it dogmatically. It took me time to come to understand this. I have to cut other people slack in their context to come to understand this. And see, by being rational, what we do, by saying only reason can produce knowledge, then what I'm doing is I'm accounting for the fact that human beings are just like me. They started ignorant and they had to learn this. So I have to slowly and patiently, and even if they disagree with me, I have to slowly and patiently go through the steps by which I discovered this. Maybe they can correct me. Maybe they've got some fact that I overlooked. Only reason can creates the need for a context of rational discourse and exchange. And that's why this engagement, this critical engagement that scholars are involved in, is actually critical, because that helps us the guys who are onto something true, it helps them sharpen their position and ever get better and better and better, precisely because they're in a civil way engaging with folks who disagree with them. But if you're committed to the process of reason, that's automatically going to give you an attitude of tolerance towards other people's disagreement. You understand that it takes evidence, logic. People come from a place of ignorance, and that engagement process is what makes it non-dogmatic. That need for evidence is what makes it non-dogmatic. And so I would distinguish between fundamentalist dogmatism and the quest for rational truth, which I think is possible. I think human knowledge is possible, but how you get there will absolutely condition how you treat that knowledge. So, for example, a person who's a fundamentalist, they have no problem. Look at the Middle Ages. They had no problem torturing people, burning them at the stake in the name of Christian love, because they were absolutely convinced. And there was no room for argument. In fact, if you were arguing with me, you're already sinning in thought. Well, if you're approaching it that way, then you are going to be a monster in enacting whatever you think is morally true or politically true. And that's the thing. We need to eliminate faith. We need to eliminate the irrational. We need to make it rational, the pursuit of truth. That will make us non-dogmatic. But you understand that skepticism, that radical skepticism and subjectivism forces dogmatism. That dogmatism itself is based on a kind of radical emotional subjectivism. They're two sides of the same coin, in my view. And so if we're going to transcend the dualism between subjectivism, this is the dualism that I object to, subjectivism, skepticism versus dogmatism and automatic certainty, emotional certainty. That is the dualism that I would object to. The answer to both is understanding the limitations of the human mind, understanding we need to deploy a specific methodology that adheres to reality. I mean, I know how the senses connect me to reality. I know how logic keeps me connected to reality. And so I need to deploy a methodology of that kind, and with the understanding that my knowledge will always be limited. That puts you in a different place, a non-dogmatic place, where you're always open to new facts, always, like the scientist, open to adjusting your understanding of the truth, which is always limited, based on the facts, a non-dogmatic approach to truth. That's, in my mind, the key distinction.
Why do you think that so many of us... Sorry, I'll let you go, me too. And for anyone that's just joining us, we're doing a mute back and forth thing. We'll be getting James some different kind of microphone for next time, but wanted to make sure you all don't hear me too much. So I apologize for that dynamic. But why do you think, and I want to take it, you're always philosophical in your answers, and I appreciate you start there because I know that's where your mind goes. But just taking it down to the real practical nitty gritty, rubber meets the road level. Everything from discussions that we have within the community about what different things in the Bible may have meant and how to interpret them. Just one that comes to mind very much off the top of my head, John 21, 153 fish. Someone could make a wonderful argument that that's Pythagoreanism. Someone else could make a wonderful argument that that's gematria or numerology. Both of them may have some interactions or overlap, but at the end of the day, people may argue that there's two very different reasons for why they're doing exactly 153 fish. But again, taking it even down to the more basic levels, when we just feel like someone else is taking a different perspective than us, and especially if they're taking a stand of sorts where they're like, I really, really strongly disagree with you. It's not just like we can agree to disagree, but like, I'm really on the other side of you. I just want to make sure you're clear. I don't agree with your conclusion. Where there is no way to rationally catch everybody up to say, well, if you know what I know, you'd agree with me. No, if you know what I know, you'd agree with me. We could run through that circle all day long. And I guess what I'm getting at is more the fundamentalism that says, I need to be humble about the limitations of my understanding, but I also need to be aware that there's a tribalism in me that tends to want to say, I need to write everybody off. Why are we doing that when we've come from that? I know, your background is a little different, but so many of us have come from that background where we're willing to separate from almost anybody that has a different theology and even a different application of their theology. We're willing to disagree with everybody and write them off. When we escape the mentality, we say this is all mythology, it's all garbage. We do not want to live that way. And yet we actually practically do. We write people off all the time. How do you personally get to the point where you can say to people, this isn't about rationality or about philosophy. This is about, we just see it differently. We see it differently. You say tomato, I say tomato. And that's the way it's going to be. How do you get to the point where we can be friends despite that dynamic?
Well, I think it very much depends upon the person. There are people I don't engage with. I mean, if a person is really just going to evade and not discuss the issue, then I'm just not going to discuss it with them. You know what I mean? If someone approaches me and says, in this day and age, that they're a racist or a Nazi or overtly a fan of totalitarian dictatorships, and there are such people in this world, I am convinced that that is bad, wrong, has negative consequences. If someone does something immoral, I, again, am going to morally judge them. And we have to separate, I think, out rational judgment here, and that's the key here. We have to separate out rational judgment, which I think is appropriate, from these areas where there can be rational disagreement. When it comes to the number of fish in a story about Jesus, whether it involves gematria or not, is a question on which I cannot claim anything like certainty. And so it could be that both are a little bit right. One is right, one is wrong. Which is right? To what degree are each side right? Maybe there's a whole third possibility that we haven't considered on a question of that kind. On a question of that, take your normal scientific question. Look, if scientists are arguing about it, if it's not so simple as 1 plus, see, look, take this, Tim. If someone were to insist to me that 1 plus 1 does not equal 2, that would eliminate the possibility of rational discourse thereafter for me if they really believe it in a mystical way. I mean, if they made some, I'll give them a minute. You want to make some argument about the innate philosophy of mathematics, well, now that's something that we can discuss and debate. But if what you're going to say is, no, take it or leave it, my way or the highway, see, it's the fundamentalist approach. See, if it's not a question of evidence and logic, then it can't be a discussion. It can't be a matter of rational discussion. And typically, you're racist, you're Nazi, you're a person who denies the fundamentals of science or something. These people are emotionally committed to it. It can't be a rational belief. Not with this context of human knowledge that we have, not in the 21st century. Any person, I mean, I'll make everyone's got an individual context. If it's a little child, if it's a 4-year-old child who just blurts out something irrational, obviously I'm not going to judge them. If it's a college professor or a political candidate, advocating for racism, then I will say to myself, before that person opened their mouth, they should have acquired the knowledge that anyone can acquire, and they realize that it is downright wrong and immoral to judge people based on their race. Racism is wrong. Now, my belief that racism is wrong will impact how I debate someone. It will impact whether I debate someone or not. The degree of that irrationality matters. But if someone is willing to get on my track of rational discussion, deploying this methodology that I'm talking about, well, if you commit yourself to the methodology of reason, well, then I'm afraid you're part of this. It's hard for me to become all moralistic at all, because you're engaged in what I think is the fundamental moral thing, the honest, heroic quest for the truth only by means of reason. But if that is your method, then suddenly you're aware that context matters. You're not going to judge someone for being ignorant. And fundamentalism, what it does is it trains us to think any disagreement. So if you disagree with my interpretation of the number of fish, that story about Jesus, well, then we're going to draw a line here. It's important. And fundamentalism conditions us to believe that coming to truth, our beliefs as such, are always a moral issue. Well, yeah, there is an honest and dishonest way to acquire beliefs. I understand that it is a moral issue at a certain level. But if someone is engaged in a rational process with me, morality, I'm going to put my values and morality in that sense to the side so we can discuss the issue substantively. And that's the real difference, as I say. Sure, it's even okay to break with people. To say, I can't be your friend anymore because you hurt me, or you did something so bad, or you believe something so obnoxious to me. That is not a fundamentalist dogmatic approach. It's you having your own judgment, your own moral judgment of a specific context. And I think we need to distinguish that very carefully. What the unfortunate thing about fundamentalism is it makes us think that any disagreement implies somehow that you're a bad person. Disagreement does not imply that a person is bad. It may not imply a person's good. It may just be a matter of their ignorance, their context, as I say, or having it pointed out to them. And so if you are committed to reason as the means of knowing and believing, then it's automatically going to invoke in you a process, an understanding of context, a cutting a slack to people's context, rather than immediately morally judging them simply for disagreeing with you.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. If you don't mind going on mute again. Again, I apologize for anyone joining us. We're having a little audio issue. Having a little audio issue on this live stream, but we'll fix that for the next time. I did want to just mention, we're going to jump into the next question here. I wanted to mention a couple things. I see some people bringing up some topics, and I do appreciate the topics you're bringing up. I do just want to mention that we are going to, for this particular interview, we're going to go through a preset list of questions that James and I agreed to earlier. So I do apologize if anyone has, if that's a downer too. But I think some of the topics I'm seeing here are very interesting, and I will definitely be taking notes regarding them and see if we can bring some of these topics back to the forefront for another interview. And James, I hope we can do that. I see especially some people talking regarding the very pertinent topic of Israel and Gaza. So maybe we can bring that up at a future date. But again, I don't want to sidetrack us from our specific list. But thank you to those of you who are making comments and hoping to address those topics. We'll do our best to get to them. And feel free, if there's other topics you want to list in there, I'll take the notes and we'll get to them hopefully shortly.
I'm afraid I am notorious on that topic. I take a very strong stance in favor of Israel, and I know that I've done several podcasts on that, and I think that's what people are talking about. It's I know a controversial topic. I have a strong view on it. I hope it is not a dogmatic view. So I would look forward to a chance to talk about that with you sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good example of a place where we would disagree. I would take a very anti-Israel perspective in the current war across the board. But anyway, we'll definitely agree to disagree on that one, and we'll bring it back to the forefront for the next topic. In fact, maybe we should. That might be a big enough topic that we should just plan the whole interview on that one. I think some people would appreciate hearing our perspectives on that, and who knows, maybe I'll bring in another one or two people to round us out too. Do want to jump into the next question. When we look at purpose, the question of what's my purpose? Of course, as Christians, our purpose is to know God and love him forever, to glorify him, and so forth, all the ramifications of that. But when you do deconvert, a lot of us end up, as I have, in nihilism. Doesn't mean that it has to be this dark, negative, life is so meaningless that, I really don't need to live. I want to live because I'm afraid of the pain of dying, but, it doesn't really matter. I don't land that way, but I know people that have landed that way, where they feel like it almost leads them to feel like they are not necessarily ready to commit suicide, but just that they just feel like, philosophically at least, that they're just like, it just really doesn't matter. And that's a hard place. And I feel a lot of I feel a lot of pain for the people who get that dark with nihilism. And although I understand it, I love life. I want to live for as long as I can. And I want to make a difference. I want to leave this world better than I found it. I want to love my children, love them with all my heart. And life to me is beautiful. And I want to make it even more beautiful for myself and those around me and those after me. But in that context, that general question of the search for purpose versus nihilism, how do you approach it, knowing that ultimately, in 100 years, no one's going to know our names? Even if one of us became president in a couple hundred years, for sure, by then, no one would know our names or really care. All of our loved ones will be gone. Almost everything that we did will feel like it is basically dust in the wind. And yet we can't live that way. You can't live there. You can't live in nihilism. It is depressing. And you have to get up and do your job and take care of your family, take care of your body, take care of your mind, and find a purpose. For the people who would say, I'm really struggling with that, I find myself saying, I had this grand purpose that meant everything to me. I know that Jesus is mythology. I know that purpose, I can't reclaim it if I want to. I can't get plugged back in the matrix. Such a high, and everything feels like low. Someone who's with that conundrum, if that makes sense.
It does. You came in and out a little bit. You were
I'm sorry.
stuttering. I think I got the gist of your point. I would say this is one of the great evils of religion, that it told them that this life was so valueless and meaningless and purposeless, when it is the source of all value. It's all there is. And so amazing how evil religion is. You see, merely positing a supernatural dimension causes a bad kind of dualism between the real and the ideal. This world can never live up to this perfect supernatural dimension, whatever it is. And so if that's the way you believe, then you're going to have automatically a theory-practice dichotomy. I mean, what does that mean? If you're really reality-oriented, there's nothing that's good in theory that doesn't work in practice. The only grounds for something, you're going to come up with a mind-body dichotomy. You notice the mystics of both East and West become ascetics. They declare war on their own bodies, starving themselves like a yogi in India, or whipping their flesh like a medieval monk in the Christian West. What it does is it's a war on reality. It's a war on life. It's a war on your body. It's a war on thinking and theory. So if your belief is mystical, if you believe in a supernatural dimension, it must denigrate this life. It is critical that you denigrate this life. You're a sinner, you're unworthy, you're like St. Augustine, you're just a rotten, miserable, or St. Augustine had a very low view of human beings, including himself. We're rotten, miserable sinners in desperate need of Christ's salvation. That's the nature of religion. The nature of religion is to diss life on earth, is necessarily to deny, disparage, denigrate any joy and happiness you find here on earth. That's the evil dualism that religion imposes on people. And can you imagine a worse psychological state to be in? Everything real, everything wonderful, the love I have for my wife and from my wife, my productive purposes in life, doing something, as you say, to improve my world for me and my family around me, a walk in nature, appreciating the beauty of the forest or a sunset, appreciating some great work of art, making life, inventing something so that human life is better off, productive achievement. Think of all the amazing things we can do here on earth. What a wonderful world this is. What an amazing life this is. And all you have to do is open up your eyes from that perspective. If you know what joy is possible to you here on earth, you will never be tempted in the first place. That's to go into religion. That's why they undermine life on earth. It must be brutish, nasty, and short, as the materialist Hobbes 400 years ago described the state of nature. No, human beings are wonderful things. I love them. My life is an amazing thing. You tell me, if someone dies young. No, my brother died when he was young, and a clergyman walks up to me. Don't worry, don't cry about his loss, and I tell the story. The one time I ever really emotionally lost it with a clergyman, but my brother had just died minutes earlier. I'm in the hospital hall crying my eyes out, and he's coming over telling me, don't worry, your brother's in a better place. I got angry at him. Said, don't you dare take one of these tears away from me. I owe it to him. This is a permanent loss. I'm never getting him back. And I said, and he says, well, you go on with that. What is the meaning and purpose then to that temporary, all too temporary? For 1 minute with him, it was worth it. That he existed at all was an infinite value to me. And he's still part of me. I am grateful that he existed at all. And so the point is that if we look at life from the standpoint of this clergyman, of course, why are we wasting our every second? Let me give you my response to Pascal's wager. Someone was saying, Pascal's wager is wrong because it doesn't tell us which God to choose from. No, it isn't. Pascal's wager is wrong because it doesn't take into account the cost of religion here in this world. The price religion takes from us, if this world is all we've got, is finite. I don't want to waste 1 nanosecond on the supernatural, on the unreal, on the false. My life is finite, and any second, any effort that I put in trying to get into the next life is wasting this wonderful, amazing life. So the purpose that religion gives you is a purpose of destroying the one life you actually do have. And if that is really the sole thing that gives you purpose and meaning, of course suicide makes sense. Of course it does. You've been emotionally conditioned to hate your own life. And all religion, let me just put it just blankly like that, all religion at some level is opposing life on earth, opposing human happiness here on earth. This can't be enough. This has got to be insufficient. We can't get joy out of this. I tell you, sir, no. Even if my life only consisted of falling in love with that amazing woman that I fell in love with, even if my life only consisted of hearing that one beautiful symphony or opera, it was all worth it. This world is amazing. I know what happiness. There's this great quote from a philosopher. I know not whether the earth on which I stand is the center of the universe or but a speck of dust lost in eternity. I know not and I care not, for I know what happiness is possible to me here on earth, and my happiness needs no higher aim to vindicate it. And I think that's the correct attitude. The correct attitude is, Mark Twain I'm quoting a bunch of people here. Mark Twain said, I wasn't here for all that, eternity of time that came before me, and it didn't bother me. When I'm gone, won't be here for that eternity of time afterwards, and it won't bother me. It's not like I'm going to be a ghost saying, oh, poor me, I'm dead, a ghost. I won't be there at all. All I've got is this finite, limited space of time that I do have, and I'm going to make the most of it. And that is plenty purpose, thank you very much. But it has to be approached like a whole entity. I have to think in terms of a lifetime. That doesn't mean short range of the moment thinking, hedonistic thinking. No, it means having a principled approach to the whole of your life, And happiness is what comes about when you achieve your values, when you are in harmony with life on earth. not when you're fighting it. That is the path of frustration and demotivation. No, life on earth is such an amazing, wonderful thing that it is one of the great crimes of mysticism and religion that it should ever even put someone into a psychological state that, but for this fantasy forever, I have no purpose. Well, that's bizarre in my view, and it is a hatred of life on earth, the amazing thing that it really is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well said.
Well said.
And
And
I'm
I'm
gonna
gonna
have you go, Medium. Thanks. I'm gonna ask a very related question, but right before I do, you made me think of something that I've said in some other interviews. In that it's fascinating how Christians would fight the idea of pornography, and a lot of the arguments that they would get into, besides just the general, immodesty of it, and the nudity and so forth, and that God's clearly prescribed you in the Bible to not see each other undressed and so forth. But a lot of them would also argue very heavily that what you're doing when you're watching, like for example, when a man is watching porn, he's setting up this superstar, in his mind that doesn't actually exist in reality. And I'm not disagreeing with some of this. I'm just saying this is how they're saying it. Your real wife is like this real person with real body that sometimes gets sick, and we all have wrinkles, we all get old, and we don't work the same way. And so that's normal, and we should still call that wonderful and beautiful. The aging process is part of life, and all of it's a beautiful process. But when you're looking at it from a pornographic mindset, you're thinking, I can think of this perfect person. It's always up for it. Their body's perfect, no wrinkles, no anything. And the sex is always great. The orgasms are amazing. And then you're like, but that's not reality. But you have the chance with this real person to make a beautiful life, and you were going to ruin it if you keep on focusing. And if you're addicted to porn, you're literally going to ignore the woman that's across the room from you. And again, I'm not disagreeing with some of that. There's some caveats I'd add, but not disagreeing with a lot of that. But although I don't personally have a moral problem with porn, but just saying I think there's some really good points there. But it's interesting to me. This is my point: is to say you would end up having Christians say that fantasy life is so damaging on this level of sexuality and marriage. But then when you escalate it up to the ultimate reality of what is real, what is this world that we're living in, and they create this bigger fantasy that's not just about one person, but about an entire, thousands of mythical creatures, angels and demons and gods and demigods and all these things. They'll create a fantasy world that's a billion times bigger and say, we're okay with that. But this little teeny, comparatively small fantasy, that's a problem. And I'm just like, come on, like if you can see that fantasy on this little level is a problem, why can't you see that fantasy at that level is obviously a much larger problem? But before you come off mute, let me just ask this question. It's a related question. When you look at the drive for purpose and nihilism, one of the things that's really hard to deal with, and some of these questions are not just philosophical, they're not just like intellectual, do you have a yes or a no answer to this? Some of these are just more just your emotional response. So I'm appreciating, the ways that you come at things. But when you lose the actual spiritual purpose that you thought you had, and you bring in some version of nihilism, hopefully a positive nihilism, one of the hardest parts of it is the randomness of life and the luck of the draw. There's no way to make a plan per se, and there's no way to expect a safe and happy outcome or even a future. We've talked about our next meeting. We both know that we may, one or both of us may not make it that far, or by the time we get back to this, one or both of us may be quadriplegics or have a cancer scare. We don't know. But that is really hard to deal with, the randomness of life and the fact that there's a lot of loss that we are facing, and some of it's incredibly painful. We don't have that backdrop of, but I know God's got me. I'm in the arms of His loving fatherhood, but also I know in the bigger picture, He has a plan. He's going to use this for a greater glory and a greater good. But then when you realize that's gone, that's completely gone from the equation. You never had, it's not really gone. You never had it, but it's gone in your mind. And then you realize every minute I get in the car, every minute I drive on the highway, I'm flipping the coin. I'm playing Russian roulette. And there's nobody that's going to keep this on the right track necessarily. Obviously, I can do my best to stay in my lane, but if there's a drunk driver next to me, I can't stop that. how do you deal emotionally with the fact that life is a seemingly so random, and that the luck of the draw, that you and I may face some very incredibly painful things that we already have, but we may face some more, and just knowing that there's no way to expect it. And if I can just add one more thing, we look at morality from the sense of, like, I want humans to treat each other well, and you talked about that a little bit earlier. But if we really did evolve, then if you go back far enough, you can't really say that hurting each other is ultimately morally wrong. Because is it wrong for a snake to eat another snake? Is it wrong for a lion to tear apart a hyena? Go back far enough, whatever the animals were back then, we wouldn't say it's wrong for a snake to eat a snake. That's its dinner. But when we come to human, is it wrong for a human to eat a human? We'd say, yes, it is. We're changing. But even in the evolutionary perspective of it all, if we could go back far enough to our ancestors, we would say it's the luck of the draw whether you even get eaten alive today. And that's not necessarily wrong. That's a hard thing to put my mind around, the randomness as well as the horror of some of that. How do you deal with that yourself, and how do you see it? How do you even clarify the question?
Well, okay. Randomness. See, I believe that in the law of cause and effect, and that's what underlies all of our scientific inquiry. I mean, we couldn't engage in science if we couldn't figure out the why of things. And if we don't know the why of things, then things can appear to be random. But randomness is actually a feature of human ignorance. But as I say, none of us are omniscient. So we cannot plan for the future in terms of being able to perfectly predict it. Well, that's where reason comes in. To the extent that we have longer lifespans, more comfortable lifespans, that our odds of surviving infant disease or childbirth have gotten better. And so it is the application of reason, and only the application of this reason thing that I've been defending, that actually controls the unknown factors. We're eliminating diseases, we're making our lives safer, we're making our lives better. And reason is the thing to do that. And I would say this applies to morality just as much as it applies to science and engineering. Morality is our way of reducing this randomness, of making my odds as best as they can for success. I would say, in fact, that's how I would define rational morality. Ethics is a very important topic, and too many atheists either throw it out with the religious bathwater, or they regard it as subjective and basically an unknown, a mystery. Well, no, I think good, sound ethics is about maximizing our long-term chances of success. And that's all we can do. We can't guarantee it, as you point out. I could get struck by lightning or hit by a bus tomorrow. Absolutely. But to the extent that I do follow principles consistently that are consistent with my long-term well-being, with the needs of life on Earth, then I can reduce the chances of harm. I can make my chances of success and happiness better. Let me put it this way. In the ideal sense, and this is my sense of it, ethics is the science of succeeding, of success, of succeeding in life. It's a how-to reduce the chances of failure, even understanding that lightning can strike tomorrow. So the reason why I, on principle, am ethical, rational, honest, productive, have integrity, respect other people's rights, what I'm doing in all of that is being a guardian of my long-term interests. I'll give you just one example. If I lie to you just once, I lose your trust. Your trust to me, Tim, is a very high value to me. I'm not going to risk that much higher value of your trust by deluding you, by risking that, by getting you to believe. Besides, only reality can be of value to either of us. And it seems to me someone who attempts to gain a value by deception is really hurting themselves and hurting their chances of getting that value in the long run. So even though life is filled with all kinds of unknowns, I can't predict the future, I could get hit by a bus tomorrow, my use of reason, science, engineering, ethics, if it's a rational ethics, not a religious ethics, are precisely that. My means of reducing the chances of tragedy and doing the best I can to maximize my chances of success. And that, I think, reason does make a difference. You look at infant mortality statistics from 500, 400, 300 years ago compared to today, Our infant mortality rates, our life expectancy is much higher. Our quality of life, the medicine, the entertainment, the clothes, the food, all dramatically improved in the last 2 centuries, faster than any other time in all of human history, mind you. I mean, it's a hockey stick graph in terms of life expectancy and human well-being. And reason is the difference. Reason is the difference. That's why we can shoot golf balls on the moon. But you see, that is the challenge here. The challenge is reason versus mysticism. Now, how do you deal with loss? We're all going to suffer loss. I just explained how my brother died at a young age. This was a long time ago. I've gone over it. But I got over it relatively easy in one sense, even early on. I realized that what matters is happiness. I don't put focus on the suffering any longer than I need to do something about it. If I can't do anything about it, my brother's just got a terminal illness, then I accept reality for what it is. That's all I can do. That's all I can do. So the humility you make, I love a wonderful point you make. What we should be is humble in the face of metaphysical fact, reality, that we have limited lives, that our lifespans are limited, that we can always be struck by lightning or hit by a bus. So those metaphysical facts are not something I'm going to fret about. That I'm just simply going to accept them as true, and then get my focus back on happiness, where happiness is the important emotion here. My brother would have, and this is what was very helpful. My brother actually said to me, because he knew he was dying, he said, "Don't you dare, let this destroy you, or go on and be happy." And so part of my motivation, thank you, Wayne, but I shouldn't have even needed Wayne to say that, right? I shouldn't have even needed him to say that. I should focus on my life and the happiness that I can achieve here. That doesn't diminish the loss. Quite the opposite. I need to acknowledge the loss for the permanent, complete loss that it is. I am going to face suffering in life. That's inevitable. But where is your focus going to be? Is your focus going to be on improving the situation, making the world a better place, making your life and the people you love better off? Or is your focus going to be wallowing in this sadness and despair? If you're just going to wallow in the sadness and despair, which religion sort of says life is, that's just the nature of life. I disagree with that. Life is not a vale of tears. There is enormous happiness here, and that's what counts. And it's that focus. It's your focus on what counts that matters. My brother would say to me, my long dead brother would say to me when we were having a good time together, just to put this all in focus, this is what life is all about. It's for moments like this. It's for moments like this that we live. And I was just giddy in joy at the moment. I knew what he was talking about. And he was saying, in effect, underlining it. This is what counts, not the pain and suffering. Because he went through pain, suffering, he went blind, and he died at the age of 30. And for him to be able to tell me, that's not what matters. What matters are these wonderful moments of priceless joy we shared.
Mm-hmm. Powerful stuff. And in terms of, I just want to respond a little bit to a couple things here and move on to the next question. But I hear you about life being beautiful. I think I'm torn by the reality that, even while we've been speaking, dozens of children have died of starvation across this planet. There's a lot of bad stuff going on, and obviously, the war in Gaza that we'll talk about in the next visit. I think part of what I'm getting at too is that I have a lot of people reach out to me, and for anyone that's kind of watching my channel for the first time because of James, number one, I appreciate that you came over because of James. James is awesome, and I appreciate that he's an anchor point. And if you don't know what I do usually long-form interviews with people, 1.5 hours to 2 hours, give or take, where people share their stories. But in the process of having done that now for going on 4 years, I've been able to be hopefully a good encouragement to some people who are going through some hard struggles, and they can tell I care and that I understand, the hardship of this experience, whether it just is their internal personal loss or the fact that they're being shunned by their family or whatever. But people do reach out to me on a regular basis and say, "Tim, I'm struggling. I've got one friend that reaches out to me at least once a month and just says, I know this is mythology, but I'm still afraid of hell. He just can't get over it. Just can't get over it. But having said that, I guess a lot of the questions we're going to go through are going to be that sense of, this isn't just like, what do you think? Like, did Josephus really write that the verbiage about Jesus, or didn't he? We're not doing that today. Some of these are more emotional, paths, things like that. So on that note, I did want to ask number one, before I get to the next question. For the sake of time, we're probably going to have to move a little bit quicker here. We're both very wordy, so we'll need to shorten ourselves down here. But I'm going to jump to the next question. Superstitious beliefs. When I was in New Guinea, I was exposed to animism, where the tribal people there lived in grass huts. Wonderful people, wonderful culture. But the missionaries there would expose me to the fact that they were animists. And as they explain what that means, they would say they're not worshiping a god, but they think there's spirits everywhere. And you do certain things to make those spirits either bless you, or if they're bad spirits, you do stuff to be kind of out of their way and invisible to them, so they don't have any reason to get you. But when you bring that superstitious belief stuff into our society, we tend to think we're past that, but we're really not. Everyone's like, hey, knock on wood, things like that. We say these different things. We sneeze and then we say, bless you. We have superstition. Some of it's kind of silly, but there's still some ways in which, on the deeper psychological level, we are superstitious. And maybe even if we say, I don't believe in angels and demons, we still kind of sense that there's somebody out to get us, whether it's as simple as angels and demons or karma or something. How do you deal with superstition on the other side of religion, in terms of exposing it in yourself and healing from it and getting to the more rational part of life that you've talked about?
You put your finger on something really important here, animism. And that, I think, is how religious belief starts. You believe that the world is imbued with consciousness. That consciousness gets personalized when we reach the stage of polytheism. And when we begin to see that all the forces in the universe are sort of integrated, there's a rational kind of, semi-rational kind of dim insight, we become monotheists. And it's very interesting. And as science progresses and people say, well, maybe there's not a God, they can often become pantheists and things like that. But that's the nature in which religious thinking has developed. I would call it the primacy of consciousness. And it makes perfect sense, because if I want to pick up my cup of coffee, I just will myself to pick up a cup of coffee, and there the will happens. So the kind of causation, I close my eyes, I don't see, I open my eyes, I do see. The kind of cause and effect that primitive people have is one of will, choice. I meant to do that. And what we do, we didn't understand what Aristotle called efficient causation, a purely mechanical kind of causation that had nothing to do with human beings and purposes. The stars, the planets, they don't have any purpose. They don't have any consciousness. And so what needs to happen is to eliminate superstitious belief in that sense, is to eradicate from our minds what I call the primacy of consciousness. There is no purpose to the universe as a whole. There's no plan to the universe as a whole. The universe as a whole is indifferent to us as a species. Just get over that. And so if you think that something happened for a purpose, or if you think that this talisman actually had some power to do this, what you're in effect doing is using old religious type thinking. That if I make the right incantation, if I make the right wish, if I appease the right God, if this spirit doesn't get offended, if we can ward off that evil spirit, all of that is a kind of primacy of consciousness. I believe in the primacy of existence. Things are what they are. And talking about humility with respect to nature, Francis Bacon, the philosopher, had a great one. He said, nature to be commanded must be obeyed. So we have to be humble. We have to be slaves to reality, in effect, in our thinking, and just get over it. Reality, just because an idea pops into my head, does not oblige reality to have it. Nor is reality like human beings, you and me. We have purposes. And yes, there's all kinds of suffering in the world. There's starving children in the world. But one of the best ways, sorry, something fell over. One of the best ways I have of coping with this is the following. And it's interesting because it comes from a prayer by a Christian theologian, Reinhold Niebuhr, the Serenity Prayer. I don't believe in God, obviously, but I think the attitude in the prayer is exactly correct. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. This, this is the key to life. I don't believe in God, but there are things I cannot change. Metaphysical facts beyond my control, they just are. I have to submit humbly to them. I cannot alter them by my consciousness, by my hopes, wishes, fears. I can't put an I wish before and it is, in this sense. On the other hand, there are things I can do. It's maybe limited, but if I can help the starving child in some way by helping to change our policy, our political or economic policy, so that children are better fed in this world, I'm going to try and do that. Do the things I can to the extent that I can. And we can only do it to the extent that we can. But once I've done it to the extent, if I've given it my, good college try and given it my all, given it my best, then I should be perfectly satisfied with myself as a human being and not beat myself up for what I couldn't have done, couldn't have known, and certainly not for the things I simply cannot control. That is to say, the wisdom to know the difference.
Mm-hmm. Well said. For the if you can go mute one more time. For the next question is, I'm going to combine two again for the sake of time, but I was going to say maybe next time. I put this as like 2 hours or less. I was going to say maybe next time when we address some of the weightier topics than this, even though some of these are weighty, maybe we'll do a little bit longer. Like, well, I don't know if I give you kind of free reign to talk, we might need to set it like 6 or 7 hours, but we'll set a longer time frame. Anyway, the afterlife. Again, I'm combining two here. There's a lot of us that wanted to live forever, and I know some people say, no, you don't want to live forever. You don't understand what you're saying. That's ridiculous. I've heard all those arguments. I've heard them repeatedly, and I do still want to live forever. Thank you very much. And so I wanted to ask, how do you advise people like myself or anyone to get over that? Not desire, I'd say, but the pain of the loss of realizing it doesn't matter how much you want it, you don't have it. A flip side of that would be wanting justice for criminals, against criminals who die, but they're not going to get it. The people that did, especially the people that did horrific things to whole groups of people, the criminals aren't going to get the justice we want. And certainly if it's personal, where it's like, that guy murdered my family member, and that guy, he died the next day in prison, a happy guy, and he never fried for it. Like, I wish there was some justice in this. How do you get past that desire to live forever, and also the desire for justice to be served? And if I could keep that question in mind, but also if you could either before, I'll let you pick if you want to answer that before or after this. Someone just put a comment in, which I think is a great comment, and I think we should add this either right now or in a few minutes. Karen says, you missed an opportunity to discuss the church that are worth trillions of dollars. The only reason for the hungry, homeless, and hurting is directly in the church of greed. Well said, Karen. Yeah, absolutely. So if you could decide where you want to plug that, your thoughts on that in, and then just talk about the afterlife.
Well, the truth is, I'm one of those people who really doesn't want to live forever, because I don't even understand what that means. I haven't even lived 500 years, much less 1,000 years, much less 10,000 years, much less 1,000,000 years, much less 1,000,000,000 years. When you say forever, you mean forever and ever and ever and ever. And having no empirical basis to judge what that is over the course of time, the idea of eternity scares me, whether it's heaven or hell. Now, I have a lot of atheist friends who believe the same philosophy, in effect, I do, who disagree with me. Say, yeah, the heck, I want to live forever so long as it's a decent life. Let me live forever and ever and ever, of course. Why not? So the question isn't really that. I mean, we should be working to maximize our lives, to live as long as we can. Science and medicine can help us there, attending to our own well-being and health. Psychologically and physically can be an important thing there. But I've accepted the idea that life is finite, that everything is finite, that everything is necessarily, to be is to be limited. You're not going to find any measurement in reality that is, the answer is infinity. Any measurement is, no matter how far out I go in space, it's a specific distance out in space. All the reality that I deal with is finite in its nature. I'm not going to condemn reality for being finite and specific and possessing an identity, in effect, I'm going to make the most of whatever that is that I have. And if you're bemoaning the lack of eternity and forever, then you're really in this weird place, it seems to me. You're not maximizing. I'll go back to Pascal's wager. You're not maximizing the finite time that you actually do have. Let's all accept that within our lifetimes, we're not going to discover the immortality pill, or even a pill that'll let us any of us live 500, much less 1,000 years. So let's all just take a deep breath, accept the facts of reality, understand that our life, in this context for sure, is super finite, and make the most of it. And if we, to the extent that we say, oh, we bemoan the finitude of life, to that extent, every moment, every ounce of energy you expend bemoaning the finitude of life is energy and time you're not spending enjoying life, making the most out of every second here. As I say, when you're gone, you're not going to be around bemoaning that you're not here. It really doesn't matter to me that the world will forget about me in 500 years and never know I existed when I'm long forgotten by my nearest and dearest. Okay, I don't care. It is for my happiness here on earth that I live. And if that is your orientation, then none of these questions is particularly relevant. The question is, how can I make the most of my life here? Now, you talk about justice and bad people. Well, it is true. Whatever justice there is human-made. Humans alone can bring justice or injustice to this world. As I say, the universe as a whole is indifferent to us. It is not helping us out or hurting us. It's just what it is. And we've got to humbly accept reality for what it is. And that includes its finitude. Now, do most criminals deserve an eternity of punishment? No, they do not. I can think of very few people who would deserve extended torture in the afterlife as a just result. Now, if you were to say to me, oh, well, let's say some torture killer, like you say, just dies accidentally. Wouldn't it be nice if there was some place where at least he could feel some justice for that? Well, yeah, but that's not the way it works. If we're going to bring justice, it's justice here on earth. Let me also suggest that this psychotic killer is not making the most of his life on earth. He's just like one of these religious people bemoaning that our lives are finite, isn't he? He's not taking into account maximizing his well-being here on earth, it seems to me. And it's not karma, it's cause and effect. If a person is acting against the long-term interests of his life, he will suffer for it. And it is true that the suffering may not be proportionate to the suffering he dished out on someone else. That's just life. The universe as a whole is not fair. So if we're going to do justice, and I think I was a prosecutor for, as you pointed out in the intro, for almost 18 years, I was eager to do justice in the only place where justice can be found, here on earth.
Mm-hmm. And before we go to the next question, did you have any comments about the whole topic of the church being able to really probably either completely or in large part address the whole suffering of the world in terms of the money that it brings in? And when you think especially about these gold-plated cathedrals, it's like, wow, if you just sold some of that property and some of your gold, that alone would feed the world. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, the astonishing hypocrisy of the church is obvious to anyone. When I first visited Rome, to get it, and I of course wanted to see the Michelangelo and the Raphael, which is amazing art in the Vatican in Rome, and you really have to go into Vatican City and into the Vatican and the Pope's own chapel to see the Sistine Chapel, and just going into St. Peter's. For me, it was it's going to be weird. I'm an atheist, but from the aesthetic standpoint, it was a deeply emotional experience to me. I love Renaissance art. Precisely because it was so secular, and the church was being such a hypocrite, so hypocritical in having these sensual art, nude bodies, and all this art. That's what made the Renaissance cool, is the hypocrisy of the church, and even hiring guys like Michelangelo and Raphael to do the art. But yeah, when I first visited Rome, it was a disgusting experience because, of course, to get into Vatican City, you have to go through a phalanx of beggars. And then once you get in, you see everything is gold plated, silver plated, real, Carrara marble, real this and that. The church is sitting on billions, and yet it insists that everyone suffer. No, in fact, suffering is the key to life. If you go by someone like Mother Teresa, she really wasn't concerned with alleviating suffering. She was concerned with wallowing in suffering to demonstrate that life is suffering and we need to transcend it through the Catholic Church. So they have their own ideological motives to sell us that life is suffering. And so it is hardly surprising to me that they sit on a vast, vast wealth that they do nothing to help the poor with, but that's allegedly their moral philosophy, is to help the poor. It's sheer hypocrisy and disgusting. You'll see that too with sex. They'll say, oh yeah, sex is evil, sex is bad. Then go look at how many priests are out doing horrible things to children, not even consensual sex acts with underage minors. Now, that tells you kind of the level of the hypocrisy of the church. But you see, hypocrisy is built in. None of us is perfect. None of us could be perfect. We're all inherent sinners. Besides, the church has got this confession and this purgatory thing so we can work off our sins, which is really what it's all about. And so if you have a scheme like that, what you've done is you've, in effect, forgiven sin, told us that, okay, you gotta, since we're all sinners, you may as well indulge your sin and then go to confession and work it off or something. But no, hypocrisy is built in. As I say, once you have this theory-practice dichotomy, which all religion generates, religion in its essence is hypocrisy. It can't live with life on earth. It is opposed to life on earth. And the more consistent the mystic, the more consistently they are opposed to life on earth.
Yeah, for sure. The next question is about, again, a lot of this is relating to religious trauma. Not all of them, but a lot of them have that consistent theme. When we were Christians, we were told, of course, you're born in sin. You're a child of Adam and Eve, and you've inherited this Adamic nature. It's a huge issue. And, Jesus in John 3 talks with Nicodemus and says, I forget the exact verbiage, but it's like you were born in sin. Like you were born condemned. The fact that you exist is a problem. And one of the side effects of that is, there's many side effects. One of the ones I want to ask about is a lot of us feel like our whole life is basically turned into an apology. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, God. I'm sorry I exist. I'm sorry I'm a child of Adam. I'm sorry I didn't please you more. I'm sorry I didn't confess my sins more. I'm sorry I don't feel the sting of sin like you do. I know you're holy, and I wish I were holy, but I'm not. It should hurt that I offend you, but it doesn't. And I know even after I accept Christ as my Lord and Savior, that even then I still sometimes sin, and it doesn't bother me like it should. And effectively, they would always use this illustration of you're freshly nailing Christ to the cross. It's like you're putting new nails in. He's already had 2 of them in each hand, and you're adding a few more in his hands. When you look at that, and then you escape it, but you've been in it for decades, your whole life is basically an apology. I'm sorry for who I am. I'm sorry I'm so goddamn messed up. I'm sorry. And then when you get past that, you're like, this is all mythology. Yahweh's mythology. Jesus is mythology. But our personalities cling to some of the old ways, and we keep on apologizing for everything, some of us. How do you advise people, and if you ever dealt with it yourself, in your journey, but if not, how do you talk to people who find themselves just apologetic for everything? And in some ways, maybe as a sidebar to that, just they're clearly not really safe and thriving and confident in their own skin and their own body, their own mind. And they feel like, effectively, I think in a side effect in some relationships, they feel like they're constantly looking for that affirmation of like, if I could just feel more beautiful, if I could just feel more loved. And if the right person comes along and says, I affirm you. And then of course, if, in marriages or whatever relationships where you don't get the affirmation you think you need or the way you need it, you kind of collapse in on yourself of like, I guess you don't love me, and now I'm angry at you because you don't love me. What's wrong? What's wrong with me? I've already been so bad and so wrong, and now you're going to passively or actively tell me I'm still not good enough. And those kind of things I've read about in books, I've heard people talk about, and I've certainly acknowledged that I do over apologize for things, and I'm sorry about that. Just kidding. But how would you address that question?
Well, first, I'm not going to apologize, but I have. That one of the negative you asked if it affected me in my own life there, and yeah, it has. Christianity, just for the period of time that I was raised a Christian and really believed in it, it left me with the belief that I am a sinner by nature, I'm corrupt by nature, I'm in desperate need of salvation. Because look at this. I mean, simply for not believing, I'm going to spend eternity in a lake of unquenchable fire. If what Jesus says is anything like what's ahead of me here, simply disbelieving is going to end me in a lake of fire. It got to the point where I literally thought that something like saying, I want, whatever it is, was a sin. How perverse. How perverse is that? It makes us hate our own bodies. It makes us hate our own natures. We are sexual creatures. We can't go through normal life without lusting in our heart. We are emotional creatures. We have a certain innate built-in palette of emotions. If someone does me an injustice, I will feel anger. Now, I hope to heck I won't initiate force every time I feel anger and get violent with people. But on the other hand, I'm going to be angry. If, as what Jesus seems to imply, that we've already sinned if we have lust in our hearts or anger in our hearts, we don't need to commit adultery or murder. You're already by your nature corrupt and sinful, then built in is guilt. Built in is guilt. They've got to start you out by thinking you are rotten, corrupt, and in need of our salvation. That's going to be devastating to self-esteem. That's going to be devastating to motivation. That's going to be devastating to making your life happy. You have to systematically reject that. You have to say, my life is important. My life is worth it. I am not wrong for trying to make my life as best as I can, because this is all I've got here. And my life here on earth matters. And I can be happy. And I can bring happiness to others. And if I don't think that, if I think that this Christian notion of perfection is even wrong. I mean, in my view, if you're doing the best you can in the context of your present knowledge, and make every allowance for errors of knowledge, for people just not knowing yet. You can't blame yourself or anyone else for not knowing what you didn't know when you didn't know it. But the point is that so long as I'm doing the best I can within the context of my knowledge, I am morally perfect. Full stop. And that is one of the evil things religion does. It disses life on earth to the point that we think somehow we're wrong for being happy, wrong for feeling sexual satisfaction. You have to be guilty for every guilty for masturbation, guilty for every orgasm you might ever experience. That is inhuman. That is just vile. Now, that's one of the terrible things about this mind-body split that religion so encourages. We have to reject the mind-body theory-practice dichotomies, which are exclusively the result of mystical supernatural thinking.
Well said. Well said. Well said. I think you mentioned the word guilt there too. It's amazing how much that word comes into the equation, and I think too we're not going to dive into this topic per se with a question, but just the autonomy of saying, you're worth more, but also you've never really embraced who you are. Like just the idea of accepting yourself. And I know self-love can be a double-edged sword, but I think there is something to say about you need to learn to love yourself. And you've been told that God kind of loves you, but he also kind of hates you. And he certainly hates your sin enough, and your sin is so embedded in you that he kind of loves you, but he hates you. And with the Old Testament stories, God clearly said, I love you and I'll bless you if you obey me, but if you don't obey me, I want to curse you, and it's gonna be really bad. You'll be so tortured by me that you'll want to eat your own children, and bad stuff. And so you end up feeling like God kind of loves me but kind of hates me, and that self-hatred it's a lot of roots to pull up. I know we've used that illustration a lot on this channel. Like you just because you're deconverted doesn't mean there aren't huge roots that go so deep. In terms of moving forward past that question, this is kind of related, honestly, but perfectionism. There's a lot of verses in the Bible, and I dealt with this, chatted with someone else who I think is actually in the comments here, if I'm understanding the YouTube, her YouTube handle correctly. But we talked about this. I want your 2 cents on it. When you're a Christian, God says, be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. Be holy, like I'm holy. And when you get that message over and over, that God's desire is not just to say, you're a sinner and I've covered you, but it's to say, you're a sinner, I've covered you, but now I am making you like me. And someday when you see me face to face, you will literally be like me. I will glorify you. You will be perfect. You will be pure. You will glow with the radiance of holiness. But that's your journey, is from sinner that's redeemed, that's declared holy, to sinner that's made holy. Your journey has to be away from sin. It has to be to holiness. And that's implied as perfection. And so a lot of us end up having these routines of like, if I go to church, this many times a week, I pray, read my Bible, just, deny myself this way, that way, confess my sins, I am becoming more and more perfect. And of course, it keeps your eyes, you're thinking your eyes are on God through this, but since he's not there, you realize this is just, you're internalizing this. You're talking to yourself. This is a way of being very self-centered. Me. Am I good enough? Am I good enough? And it's like a psychosis. But the perfectionism that we all get driven to in Christianity, how do you think people can start to realize that that's part of their psyche, and to change it and say, we all need to mature and make good decisions, obviously, but you don't have to be perfect. And you need to just move past that whole idea that there's some kind of level to which you'll get. And if you get there, like, life is always up ahead. If you could just be more holy, more perfect, then you'll be okay. Your maturity will be enough to make God happy, and he'll stop frowning at you. And to say, like, to start getting rid of that garbage and say, take a deep breath, for goodness sake. You are fine just the way you are,
That's it. Self-acceptance is so critical, and Christianity gets in the way of self-acceptance, even with our limit, because, as I say, we are limited beings. Now, having this impossible standard for perfection is the first problem, and it's an intrinsic one. It doesn't take into account individual context at all, does it? As I was saying, to correctly morally evaluate someone, you've got to take into account their individual context, their ignorance, perhaps, of things. Christian morality does not cut any slack for a chance to learn and grow and discover and, get better. I like to say, I'm perfect in getting better, because we always have room to improve. In fact, perfection may be seen, in my mind, morally, as a commitment to continuous improvement. There's no bell to ring. There's no intrinsic, bell of virtue to ring. But if you believe that, then guess what? Even after your conversion, you're going to lust in your heart. You're going to be angry. You're going to recognize, well, yes, I am this sinner, but I can't live up to it. So if I can't, even after my conversion, if I show signs of being a sinner, my salvation is in jeopardy. My self-esteem is totally in jeopardy. And I am privately harboring the notion that, yes, I'm a rotten person because I can't really live up to it. Well, guilt, unearned guilt, is built into that kind of scheme, isn't it? Unearned. So what it becomes is, the way you put it is really neat. It's this self-obsessed self-obsession. So in other words, being self-obsessed is not healthy. Being self-obsessed is really not in your own self-interest. It's the person who has chronic self-esteem issues who is the boaster, the narcissist. Yeah. And so this is an unhealthy self-obsession that comes from the insecurity that necessarily comes from believing you're inherently rotten. If I believe that, no, I can do better, I can improve, a realistic context, and hey, I'm doing the best I can in my context, then you're cutting yourself the appropriate slack. You're not demanding of yourself the impossible. You're not saying, if I don't live up to this somebody else's intrinsic standard, I'm still rotten. No, that perspective must be flushed from human consciousness as thoroughly as we can. Flush it from human consciousness, because as I say, it's two sides of the same coin. If subjectivism and dogmatism are two sides of the same coin, so this neurotic, narcissistic self-obsession is the other side of the coin of we're all rotten kind of Christian humility, an unearned humility that says we are guilty by our natures. But we are not guilty by our natures. We should embrace our natures, from our sexual nature to our physical nature to the limitations of our life. And only when we accept the reality of what we are and who we are, do we have a chance at happiness and a relaxed approach to just improving my life as best I can.
Mm-hmm. Well said. I want to move a little bit faster in a couple of these for the sake of time. I've got this one topic, and I'm going to add a little bit more nuance than I gave you a heads up about. But dealing with anger against Christians after deconversion, against Christianity and against Christians. A lot of us struggle with that. We feel like we were gypped of a life of more choices, more autonomy, more information. And then maybe a flip side of that too, that coin, is our perspectives on Christians that can be even condescending and patronizing, where we in a good sense feel very bad for them. I feel like you're in a prison and I'm really sorry for you. But at the same time, we also are saying, I respect your autonomy to choose that religion if that's really what you want to choose. I don't respect your autonomy to abuse children with it and to do psychological abuse to them. But you individually, you yourself, you can pick what you want. If you really want to follow Jesus Christ, that's your choice. That's your life. I should not have any way to impose on, forcing you to leave that. And I never would want to. But, we come at this and we want to get over our anger against Christians and Christianity in our individual churches. And we also feel like you all are such suckers. You all are we lump ourselves in there first. Like, I was a sucker in the room and now you all are suckers. And it's like, what the hell is wrong with you people? Can you not see you're pretending to eat when you eat the bread, you're pretending to eat the body and drink the blood of a dead man. And your God has said he wants to cut off the end of little boys' penises when they're 8 days old. I mean, are you kidding me? What is wrong with you people? Can you not see it? And yet when we say it that way and we feel that way, there's a part of us that's shooting ourselves in the foot, because just like any context, if you get too patronizing, the conversation's over. And they can't hear you anymore. All they hear is, you're an arrogant son of a bitch, and you don't understand where I'm coming from. And those conversations pretty much drift away because they can't hear you and you can't hear them. And, in some ways we don't want to hear them. And in many ways they don't want to hear us. I get that why that happens, but it also ends up that relationships break down because of it. And it's a hard balance to keep. How do you keep it, and how would you respond or rephrase that question?
Well, you said something very important there. I was a Christian. I actually had that mistake, and I think we all need to bear in mind, those of us who have come out of a religious context. I mean, fortunate are those who never had that background, I suppose, and I can say that for sure. But knowing that I myself made the very same mistake, I mean, puts me in a position where that tempers my view about most of the Christians I meet in just ordinary life. They're just like me. I mean, they are now still just like I was once. And then I think about my parents who took me to church. I love them, and they did it out of purely benevolent motives. I'm never going to judge my parents for taking me to church, even though I do believe it caused me harm. Yes, my parents took me to church, it caused me harm, but it wasn't their fault. No, they were doing the best they could in their context. Having a non-religious view about religious people themselves is important. Don't have a dogmatic view about morality when it comes to the dogmatists even. My parents knew no other way to teach their children morality. They were simply unaware of any other way to instill moral values. And so they took their kids to church. My parents are benevolent people. I'm not going to blame them for the rest of my life, even if that hurt me. And then I think of my grandmother. Even after I became an atheist, there was no way I was even going to bring that up with Grandma. It would only hurt her emotionally, and there was no way I was ever going to convince her. And so why even bring up the topic with her? Why? Now, if someone is out being overtly irrational in their continued evangelism for their religion, you can criticize, but keep the criticism to the substance of their ideas and their message. Don't personalize it. The minute you personalize a debate, the minute you say, that guy, it's him, he's evil, it's that guy that's the problem, instead of it's the message that's the problem, you're not cutting human beings that contextual slack that I say is all important, that respect for the other person's reason and their judgment. We all have to go by the best individual judgment that we have. And if someone disagrees with me about God, that can be perfectly, even in the 21st century, my atheist friends, that can be perfectly innocent, that can be perfectly honest. Just because someone believes in God or someone still adheres to a form of Christianity doesn't necessarily mean they're rotten, awful people. Bear that in mind. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Don't walk in the door saying, well, just because you're a Christian in the 21st century, you must be this atavist, knuckle-dragging Neanderthal. You never, as you point out, if you do want to persuade people, you're never going to persuade them that way. You're only going to persuade them by, as I keep coming back to, respecting that the context of the individual is all important. Where do they come from? What was their experience? What do they know right now, and how well do they know it? Take into account individual context. Until you know that other individual's personal context, you can't judge them simply for a belief that they're holding. In nearly every case, maybe there could be a couple of exceptions, some goose-stepping Nazi or something, where I might draw the line and say, no, I'm not even going to entertain a discussion with that guy. There may be some outer limit to that because they're just so willfully irrational. But on the other hand, simply for a belief, no, you can't judge that person until you know why they have that belief, what their personal context is. That is the only basis for any sound judgment. And that is exactly the kind of thing dogmatism versus subjectivism trains our mind into doing. It's that on-off switch. You're evil, you're Adolf Hitler himself if you have any disagreement with me on religion. Ladies and gentlemen, that is unfair to people. Humans are still growing and learning as a species. We're still growing and learning as a species. And, if you went in the time machine 300 years ago, the ordinary Christian might get burnt at the stake today in a Christian world. So progress is happening. Cut the human species a little slack, but understand that each of us has our own context. And that, I think, is absolutely critical. We have to have a non-religious approach to judgment. And that, unfortunately, both the religious side and the subjectivist radical skeptic side only encourage.
Yeah, well said. It's quite a perfect timing. Somebody just put a comment in that's literally what I was about to ask. So that either you've got your ESP and you're reading my mind, or it's just perfect timing. But Aaron Curdy asks the question that I was going to ask: what's your opinion on near-death experiences? So I would, and by the way, I'm going to cut out a couple of the questions for the sake of time. They're just, I can tell which ones are a little bit too big to hit too quickly. So we're going to do near-death experiences, and then one final one after that, and then I'll give you a chance to add anything you want to add to wrap us up. But what do you think? There's a lot of people that do come at that with a lot of open-mindedness. Like there's just too much out there to discount it, and there's a whole other group. I'm probably in the second group that would say, I'm sorry, but I still don't think there's anything there. What do you think? Do you think people have had any experiences? And if you had a friend that you're like, you could trust that they weren't sensationalizing it, they're like, no, I honestly, truly had this experience, and I'm sure I went somewhere. I'm sure I levitated and saw my body, or whatever the experience is. How do you process those stories?
If I had a near-death experience, I wouldn't trust it. That is to say, I distinguish between observation of reality through sense perception and dreams, hallucinations, mental experiences that I know were not direct contact with reality. I do not treat hallucinations, dreams, or how they describe, and they all describe them as I'm out of my body isn't. Sometimes they'll say I look down at the beginning of it, I'm looking down on my body. Well, that's not perception. That's not observation. That's the first thing to note. It's not a species of observation. It's more like a dream or a hallucination. It's a post-event having been brought back. I'll report what my inner mental experience was afterwards. That is not a validated observation that you can draw any scientific conclusions from at all in the first instance. So even if I had a near-death experience, I would distrust it. So, but much less a friend of mine that I trusted. A personal, unverifiable experience of any kind. People will often say, well, there's this amazing coincidence that happened. And you'll never understand it because it happened to me, but it was this personal experience. Well, none of that is the basis for science. Science has to go by verified and verifiable observation. If it is not verifiable, I'm afraid it's not an observation that can form the empirical basis of science. The other thing is, from what I have studied of the subject, they are culturally dependent. So depending on how you're raised, you will have a different kind of near-death experience. Now, it's funny because people who go say, well, I was an atheist, but I saw the fires of hell. That tends to be a Western near-death experience. For people in the Far East, they will envision a garden. They will envision something altogether different in the afterlife that is more consistent with their view of what an afterlife would be like or could be like. So I think it is very much culturally dependent, and I think they have basically the status of hallucinations or dreams.
Good answer. And I would feel the same way, and I know I'm stepping on some toes because there's some atheists I've come across that have said that we're underestimating these stories, and I appreciate the people that do have a different perspective. I would fall in line with yours. I don't think they're that's something we can rely on. And I had something. This is going to weird some people out. I'm going to share this real quick, but it's just weird. But I would say it's kind of the same category. For years growing up, I would notice, and again, I'm sorry, people are going to be like, this is really stupid or weird, but I would notice that stuff would be on my desk, like, as a kid, you have your desk where you do your schoolwork, whatever, and stuff that there was no way that it could fall off, apart from, like, if there's a window open, there's a big windstorm, some tornado could have blown it off, or if you had a cat could have come up and knocked it off. But apart from that, it's a room, there's no windows open, the doors are shut, there's no one coming to visit. You put something down, like in the middle of the desk, it can't roll, and you come back 5 minutes later and it's on the floor. And I noticed growing up that this would happen to me over and over and over. And I would make tests. I would be like, I'd pick up a pen and I would put it somewhere in the middle, and I'd put stuff around it. Like, there's no way that's going to fall. And I'd come in the room and it's on the floor. You can take these experiences and say, I don't know what happened, and that's the end of my conclusion. I don't know what happened. Or you can make something up and say, that has to be a demon. It has to be some kind of, the force. I don't know what happened. And I maybe arguably should have put a camera up if I could have foreseen that. But you know what? I'm not going to embrace some kind of weird woo-woo just because I can't explain it. And same thing with near-death experiences. I don't know what happened to the pan. I don't know why it kept falling on the floor, but it doesn't mean there's demons pushing stuff off. And arguably, I don't think the demons would have been that concerned about my pen falling on the floor anyway. But it's just an unknown. I saw it dozens, if not hundreds of times growing up, and it freaked me out, honestly, for years. It doesn't mean that there's some kind of other spiritual side of life. So anyway.
There may have been a force that was doing something that we don't know. Let's assume that.
Exactly.
Well, the problem is that going from an I don't know to well, that must mean that there's a demon, or that the Jewish Christian God exists, or that, Shiva did it from a Hindu perspective. Ignorance is not an excuse to make up fairy tales. It's what we fill in the ignorance with that's, for all I know, there was some weird magnetic force unique to the geology of where your house was located as a kid. I don't know. But I'm not going to take that I don't know and then make up whatever fairy tale and fantasy I want that comforts me. It's a complete we need to get more comfortable saying, I don't know. Many times. The situation is, I simply don't know. Look, I lose my keys. I don't know where I left my keys. Where did I leave it? Then I find my key. Well, there is no way I put my keys there. All it is that I've forgotten where I put my keys. And somehow it seems like, oh, well, some other force, maybe the keys got up and walked up there. Maybe God meant me to be late for my dentist appointment or something and put my car keys up on the mantle. But really, it's usually a function either of confirmation bias on our part, what we're looking for, or simple ignorance on our part. We don't know. But as I say, even if there is some mysterious force that we don't know explaining it, simply say, I don't know. It's not a license to make up demons, gods, and whatever other fantasy you want.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. Well, the last question for today, and again, you're welcome to add anything here at the end of it, but we're going to end with a wonderfully fun topic of embracing eroticism. A lot of us grew up, and I've talked about this a lot on my channel, but a lot of us just grew up thinking that whole area was off limits, and that you could certainly fully redeem it and enjoy it in marriage, but that it was very strict, but that even within marriage, there were limits of that you needed to still see this body spirit dualism of, like, God is kind of permitting you to be erotic with your spouse, but even that's just like a temporary thing. He wants you to ultimately be very spiritually minded. Keep your eyes on the things above, not the things below. And so when a lot of us deconvert, there was a real hard, difficult journey of like, you want to get past so many of those old ideas, and you truly want to not just survive, but thrive and celebrate your sexuality. And to say, I mean, there's so much guilt, and I know this is often a topic that's brought up with a smirk and a joke, but like, guys really were beat up over masturbation. And I'm not saying girls weren't. It's just those are the groups I was in, was guys talking in these men's Bible studies of guys, stop masturbating. You are truly offending God, and you can't do that without fantasizing. So you're therefore offending whoever you're fantasizing about, and you're offending your future wife. And it's just like, you feel so bad because you ejaculated. You feel so bad because you had an orgasm. And when you add that all up and you get out of it from, you escape Christianity, it just doesn't just drop. You still feel like this is like this secret life of like, I hope they don't know who I really am. I hope they don't know that I really do think about boobs and tits all the time. I hope they really don't think that I look twice at a bra strap. And you're just like, I feel like there's this hidden world. As a Christian, there is a hidden world. But even after deconversion, you're like, I just want to be me. I want to like what I like. I want to lust when I want to lust. I want to fantasize when I want to fantasize. And I want to be okay with it. And I want to like myself, including my sexual drives and my desires and my fantasies. And yet so many of us can't do it. And especially if you said just the real strong question of, do you embrace eroticism? Like, do you permit it? Do you kind of make accommodations for it? But do you fully embrace it? Are you an erotic person? Or are you okay with, thoughts of not just being sexually active in a very basic, plain vanilla sense, but like, do you want to have fun? Do you want to learn new sexual techniques someday when you're in the right context? Do you want to just enlarge your thought process and your sensations? Do you want to make sex a bigger deal than it's ever been in your life? And in some ways, a lot of us are like, I kind of want that, but I know that I just can't do it. I feel so guilty. Going back to the word guilt, I feel so guilty. How would you talk to somebody that's saying, I think there's a whole sexual part of me that has never had autonomy. I've never had the freedom to just explore and explode my desires and to celebrate and say, this is great, but I want to, but I can't,
Yeah, boy, this is a big one, isn't it? Being condemned for our sexual nature is one of the worst remnants of religious dualism. This mind-body dichotomy, this theory-practice split, this condemnation of people for their very natures. We are animals. We are biological creatures. The most intense physical pleasure that we can experience, there are a bunch of them, but the single most intense physical experience we can have is sex. We should embrace it enthusiastically. We should cherish it, venerate it, exalt it, glorify it, put it in our art. And a great deal of the art humans have produced has been explicitly erotic. So yeah, but a part of the thing is that religion has had the monopoly on ethics for so long. We need to end that. Yes, there is an ethical and a non-ethical way to approach one's sex life. If you're just trying to get as much sex as you can, and you're just trying to get laid and just trying to have as many orgasms as possible, that's not the most fulfilling sex life. I found in my own experience, and you see, what we got to do, we got to just say, forget that religious stuff, erase the whiteboard, start from scratch. And what I did is I actually, as a young person, went about and experimented with a variety of things, realized in the course of years that goes by, something, having a relationship with this lady is really giving me the best sex, the best orgasms. More than that, my mind and my body are working together. My moral and psychological values are embodied in her, and the visibility she gives me in the process of this sexual thing is, so what I want is a sexual relationship. And the sex gets better and better and better, I realized. So if I'm just a promiscuous person trying to gain self-esteem through his conquests, I think I'm on a self-defeating path there. You can never really acquire self-esteem from the number of notches on your bedpost. That is trying to reverse the law of cause and effect. I celebrate my self-esteem when I have sex. It's only a person who's comfortable with themselves and their sexual nature who can really relax and have uninhibited sex. The best kind of sex is where you're letting yourself go. And you have to let yourself go to have the best kind of sex. But I can only let myself go in a certain context with a person who has certain psychological and moral values and characteristics that I respond to. So being honest with your partner, being communicative with your partner, being long range in your approach to your values, all pertain to the realm of morality. But within that scope, what do we do to children? We traumatize little girls with words like slut. We traumatize little boys with words like fag. And we get them to feel guilty for just having a sexual nature of some kind. That is wrong. That is condemning them for their nature. And what you're going to do is you're setting up neurosis, guilt, inhibition for the rest of their life. Morality does pertain to everything in life, including our sex lives. I would say that if you're just promiscuously out there trying to get as many orgasms as possible, you're being self-defeating. You're not getting the most out of sex. You're not getting the most out of sex. To get the most out of sex, you need to have a relationship with another human being, a communicative relationship, an honest relationship, a relationship of shared respect and shared values. The best sex happens under those conditions. I'm not saying it because I'm opposed to sex. I'm saying it because sex is such a wonderful, great thing. That's why we should treat sex seriously. And unfortunately, Christian morality and most deeply religious morality gets us thinking of our bodies and sex in very negative ways. Can people misuse their sexual nature? Absolutely. Pedophiles, rapists, even people who, as I say, aren't taking it seriously because religion conditions them to think that it's just some low, dirty thing. So it's just this physical thing. So if that's the case, I may as well just indulge it thoughtlessly and physically. No. We need to think of rationality as this worldly, as an earthly means of maximizing our sex life, getting the most, squeezing the most out of our sex life. So the point is that being principled about it is the fusion of, let me put it this way, spirit and matter. Sex is the most amazing conjunction, can be the most amazing conjunction of my intellectual and moral values with my physical action. It expresses my self-esteem, the sum of what I think of myself and the sum of what I think of my partner, all at once in this what should be a beautiful, honest intervisibility of, and a celebration of our lives, a celebration of ourselves, a celebration that you're this cool, amazing human being and that I'm this cool, amazing human being. Let's come together and celebrate that. That's the way we should look at sex, as the great romantic love, and sex within romantic love is one of the pinnacle values. And if you don't think so, and you lose your religion, if you never achieve that, no wonder they turn into nihilists. That's what kind of where we began, right? No wonder they get suicidal when they lose their religion, because all I have is this dirty, low physical thing, right? Which is condemning me to my sin, right? If I lose my religion, well, that's all I am, is this dirty, low thing that's, pursuing orgasms thoughtlessly and in any way I want. No. If we combine our intellectual values and our physical needs, we actually maximize the pleasure we get from sex, which is a glorious, wonderful thing that ought to be elevated, celebrated, and embraced.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Well said. Well, the title for this topic was that we were going to solve the world's problems. We got pretty darn close, but we didn't solve them all. I think if we're going to talk about Gaza next time, and maybe we can talk about the presidential election and fixing the electoral college, moving towards socialism, and a few other things. I think we'll get there, but we got close. We did a good stab at it. But I just want to say,
I think we did.
Thank you so much for joining me. Before I kind of wrap us up, did you have any final remarks of anything that you wanted to add?
I just want to say what a wonderful conversation this was. It was, we touched on so many wonderful issues, but the truth is that humanity is still getting over religion. Even people who claim to be atheists and are atheists are still impacted by the philosophical underpinnings that have psychologically automatized, like these mind-body theory practice dualisms, this unrealistic view of perfection and demands on oneself that can only cause us unearned guilt. What we need to do is purge from our minds, even my atheist friends out there, the most secular of you out there, probably like I did long after I lost the belief in God, I still needed to purge from my mind all these modes of religious thought, which still pollute, unfortunately, the psychology as sort of a carryover from a more primitive time, like these superstitious beliefs we were talking about, or the unearned guilt of just being a sexual being. We've got to purge these religious ways of thinking from our heads. Then and only then will the damage, the psychological and moral damage that religion has done, be gotten past.
Yeah, for sure. And I just gonna say too, one of the things that came to mind in terms of a word picture for what we did today. I love that picture in the Matrix where Neo is first, escaped from the Matrix, but they're starting to train him. And the first time they're training him to jump from one building to another because the buildings aren't really there. But to him, he's like, wow, gravity's going to pull me down and kill me. But, and so, Morpheus does it. And they say the words, free your mind. And I think that's a good way to sum it up, is so many of the things we're trying to learn and unlearn are about freeing our minds. And, or as Yoda would say, unlearn what you've learned. But this has been so good, and I appreciate your perspectives. I did want to also add, we'll wrap up here in about 30 seconds. But for anyone that made comments on the side, thank you so much for your comments. I know that sometimes we do these, and we're going to your questions a lot and reading them off. This was a little bit different, and I'm sorry if it was disappointing to anybody. I did read a few comments throughout it, but we'll probably, if we do it, go through the topic of Gaza. If you're okay with it, we'll maybe take more live stream comments next time from people. But this was a little bit different. But James and I have been trying to do this for we literally put some of these topics on the table back in 2021. If you remember, we talked with because some of these we were going to attack then, and we finally got to them today. So some of these have been sitting here for 3 years. So I'm so glad we got them. We got a lot of them off the table. But we'll attack the rest at some point. But I apologize to anyone who was disappointed. It was not on James. That's my choice. But next time we'll make sure we're more attentive to the comments. But thank you for joining us, and thank you for the comments you did make. I know some of them I did read. Amazing stuff. But I just want to say thank you to James again. For anyone that did not hear me at the beginning, James is an author. I've got the Amazon link beneath this video. Check out his website. Check out his other stuff. He's got a lot of cool interviews, including ones that videos that you've done about Roman provenance. Really cool stuff. But I think the biggest thing I've always appreciated about you is just you've got the academic side that you pursue, but also you've got a heart of gold. You love people. You bring a lot of philosophy into it. And at the end of the day, you and I, even today, have disagreed on some stuff, and we can walk away and say, I still love you, brother. I still love you. And that's to me is worth its weight in gold.
May I just end by saying thank you. I love you, Tim.
Thank you so much. I love you too, in a very real and non-sexual sense. Everyone, thank you so much. We've been speaking with James Valliant. We'll do it again soon. Hope you all have a great Friday and a great weekend. Thanks again for joining us today. Bye-bye.